Good evening, everyone. I'd like to thank everyone for coming here tonight and have the chance to introduce to you the program that we have presented in the center of the fair, which is called Ko-lab. Ko-lab is an initiative that falls under the Emirati-French Cultural Program. That is an initiative between the Institut Français and the Tourism and Culture Authority of Abu Dhabi. There are a series of events that Ko-lab is preparing. One of them is a theater program, a music program, and then here we have the contemporary art program. What I'd like to say about it is that it's a long-term initiative that is not going to be a matter of months to appear, but it has started last year, in which we have selected a number of Emirati-based artists and Emirati nationals as well, to work with 4 high-end manufacturers from France. And by doing that, we allow the cultural exchange to flourish, and not only in a short period of time, but also allow these artists to communicate and have a dialogue with the manufacturers. The manufacturers, we can change the slide. So there's no remote, so I'll be doing this. Don't wonder about what this means. This means change the slide, okay? So I'd like to start with the first pair, which is Khaled Shafar with Mobilier National, or Manufacture de Beauvais, which is a factory that was appointed by Louis XIV, excuse me, and in the 17th century. So this is a manufacturer that has been going on, and it's a factory of tapestries and different kinds of embroideries as well. That was appointed by the king, so it has a very rich history, and they've been working with heritage pieces as well as contemporary artists, and they continue to work with contemporary artists today. They've worked with artists like Picasso, with Matisse and others, and we're happy to finally have an artist from the UAE to work with such a big manufacturer. Next, please. We have Zainab El-Hashimi, who's working with Verrerie de Saint-Just, and this manufacturer is one of its kind, in which they continue to work in a very traditional way of glassmaking, and today you have only 30 workers who work in this specific way that I cannot explain to you in details because it's not my expertise, but you have 10 of these experts working in this factory, so it's really one of a kind. And they worked with also artists like Marc Chagall, also with Matisse and big names. And as well, today we're also happy to allow Zainab to go, and which you can see here that already all of the artists have been to these factories and worked together with them. So this is Zainab. And this is Ocean, who's here with us. So it's a beautiful team working together to create this kind of collaboration. Next, please. And then Taline Hasbar is an artist who's based in the UAE, and she's also an architect, which allows her to really feel the materiality of things. So we thought pairing Taline with Sèvres, who, if you've been to the previous talk, has worked with Giuseppe Pennone, as well as big other artists like Louise Bourgeois and many others. Taline went and visited the manufacturer, and she stayed there in the Place Cité de la Céramique, and actually felt like she went back in time where she was testing all different kinds of ceramics. I won't go in details with these pairs because we have a wonderful pair here with us, and we'll allow time to, we'll have time more to discuss it with them. Can you go next, please? So, we have last but not least Vikram Divecha, who's born, look, I told Vikram I'll read your bio because he's quite a conceptual artist and many of you know him. So Vikram is born in 1977 in Beirut. He's a Mumbai-bred artist based in Dubai. His work addresses labor, time, and value. His practice has developed around what he calls found processes. Those forces at work within state, social, economic, and industrial spheres. Intervening directly on these processes, Divecha introduces glitches or realigns a system, generating an altered, amplified outcome, constantly negotiating for existing material, space, and labor. He navigates communities in deepening dialogues with potential participants by aligning himself to the system. Divecha adapts his strategies as the project itself evolves, recontextualizing the movement of goods through a warehouse, reframing agencies among municipal gardeners, such as the situations created across practice invested in the social dynamics of actual urban spaces. His engagements translate into public art, sculptural installations, videos, and drawings. This is just to give justice to the thought of Vikram and his conceptual work, but I would say at the beginning of the project, I was asked to give names of artists based in the UAE as well as Emirati artists, and pairing these artists with the manufacturers was a process of sending out these names to the manufacturers and them selecting which artist works best with them. And I remember with Vikram, we were discussing the fact that Vikram works with fragments, and you will see when he speaks about his work, he works a lot with fragments and he works a lot with workers. So it was nice to pair him with something that it would be quite challenging, because MTX is high-end kind of savoir-faire, although it really matches the practice of Vikram. So I will not speak a lot. I will give the chance to the artists and to Matthieu Basée, who's also here with us, to represent MTX, who's the artistic director, development director at MTX, Broaderie Architecturale. I'll leave it to you to introduce MTX, and which you will do better than me. So please, next.
Yeah. So everybody can hear me? Yeah. So MTX is a new activity of an embroidery workshop called Montex. And Montex was founded in 1939. It's based in Paris, and it's a haute couture embroidery workshop working for the leading designers of the field. It's been under the artistic direction of Annie Trussard, who's sitting on the front row here since 1987. She's not sitting in the front row since 1987. She's the artistic director since that date. And she introduced some fresh air in the embroidery practice through the incorporation, for instance, of unconventional materials in embroidery, such as metal, plastics, sometimes concrete, and by renewing also the gesture of the embroidery. And not only did she renew this practice, she also created MTX, which is a department that actually extract the embroidery from the clothes and spread them into space. So it's a kind of an emancipation of embroidery, and it creates a new field, I could say it like that, between sculpture and interior architecture. And I think the best way to understand what I'm saying is to maybe see a little movie that presents four of our projects. So if you can send the movie now. So the first project is called Averse, means rainfall. As you can see, it's made of metal tubes that are assembled together. So first, these images are some mock-ups and research, and that's the shape that interests us. So we begin to build it. It's done by hand, obviously. We can see one of the embroiderer threading the tubes, metal and glass tubes together. And very often, we don't only do the embroidery, we also create the structure that will best exhibit the work. So we are working with engineers and with other companies that share the same level of quality that we do in embroidery, and they create those structures for us. Everything is in the details, both in terms of assembling and also in the overall composition. The second project is called Reversible. It's made with very, very small sequins that are embroidered on transparent triangles. So again, some research to find the right density, the right pattern, to create, in the end, you will see a special effect. So again, an embroiderer working. So those triangles, they are fixed on wires, and those wires are stretched on a metal frame. And these images show new gesture in the embroidery that complements the classical ones. And this is a shot from one of the workshops. So in the end, you have this kind of floating elements thanks to the transparency and the thickness of the wires. The third project, Account, is a very different take on embroidery. Again, mock-ups in paper in order to find the right shape. It's inspired by moldings that you can find in typical Parisian apartment. And the shapes themselves are extremely complicated. They are articulated together with little tubes. And we use them, we bend them, we twist them to create some curls and some swirls that are sewn directly on a metal mesh. So it might be the most figurative proposition we have so far, such as a kind of a floating structure in the air. And the last project I'm going to present is called Fragment. So again, modules. As you can see, module is something very strong in our work. Those modules are hexagonal and in felt. They are embroidered with glass tubes, with metal, with crystals from Swarovski, and they are connected together with metal hinges. And those hinges are tailor-made just for this project. So it creates a continuous surface, what is called a tessellation. And this surface can be shaped in different formats. And for this expression here, we have a circular rail, 4.5 meters, that creates this semi-open architecture. And I think this image shows what we mean when we talk about architectural embroidery. Maybe the next slide? Or not? Yeah. So just to go into maybe more detail on this is, for instance, this is the base of Fragment I've just shown. So it's a triangle that comes directly from the fashion industry. It means it was a creation of Annie for one of the designers, and we decided to reuse it. But one triangle was too simple, so we doubled it. Next slide. Yes, like this. So the shape begins to be a little more complex, and we multiply the shape. That's where the hexagon begins to appear. And that's also because very often, and we are talking about that just a few minutes ago, when people see our work, they very often refer to the art of Islam. And it was not an intention, but when you begin to work on tessellation and geometrical pattern, at some point there are some distinctive shapes that appear, whether you intend it or not. So we have our hexagon. We decided to fix it on a module in felt. So that's the basic module. We had some little pieces to fix the triangles, and because we are not reasonable people, we add some crystals and more crystals. Yes. And then we connect the modules together with the hinges. That will be the next slide. And as you can see, the module is not that simple, but not too complicated. But when you multiply it, it creates a very intriguing pattern. And that's become the final creation.
It's really interesting to see the way that you start creating, because it's, as you said, it's like the Islamic patterns, and it always starts with a basic shape, and then to come up with a design like that. I've seen this in the showroom. It's absolutely fantastic. We wanted to bring it to Abu Dhabi Art, but it was really big and difficult to transport. We can thank you, Matthieu, for the introduction, because it's nice to introduce the public about what you do internally and the thought process of how you create such pieces. We'll move on to Vikram, who will give us also an introduction and an example of few commissions that he has worked on. And we'll try to have the last slot of this talk to discuss the current collaboration that the artists and manufacturers are doing. The final artwork, hopefully, of the museum. Now we are starting, if you could see outside at the booth of Ko-lab, it's a research exhibition, so you have pieces from the manufacturers, but the artists present their thought process and their samples and the way they're thinking. Vikram has an interesting dialogue, which I invite you, to read, and he will explain to you more about it. But the final artwork will be exhibited in the Louvre Abu Dhabi, which is really a great chance for the artists and the manufacturers to present in such a big museum. And also for me coming from the Louvre Abu Dhabi, I would like to say also that it's a chance also for us as a museum to open up to emerging artists. I wouldn't say emerging, you're already established, but I mean for young talents who wanted to explore, even sometimes you don't have places as a platform, and not only as that, but also as a research place where you can already discuss your ideas with experts and art historians, which already the artists have done with our curators from the Louvre Abu Dhabi. So it's a great chance of exchange at many different levels. I'll give you the mic, Vikram, and you can give us an introduction about your work.
Sure. Hello, everyone. So Matthew, I love your presentation.
Thank you.
And I love the relationship between units and systems, which is at the core of your work. And I'm so glad I'm collaborating with MTX, and thanks to Ko-lab, for giving me this opportunity, and all of us artists as well. We're collaborating with great people. And also I want to go back to Alia. Like Alia, that was a very complicated bio you read. And I'm going to show you a few slides of my work, and hopefully that dismantles the ideas I'm trying to explore. I've been in Dubai for the last 11 years. For the last 5 years, I'm trying to make some work over here. And that's not my work. That's not my work as well.
That's still us, actually, but we can come back to that later,
Yeah.
maybe.
I cut your...
Kind of, but
Sorry, I cut it short. We can go
Yeah,
back
we
to
can
it
go back
after
to it.
Vikram.
We'll
Yes,
talk
can
about-
you go
Okay.
next, please?
again.
Yeah,
Or
we want-
actually, you know what, Mathieu,
Mathieu,
maybe you can
continue.
you can talk.
Okay,
Yes,
I can,
yes,
I can.
it's
So we
easier.
have to go back like 3 or 4 slides backwards. Yeah. So this one, I think you've seen it. So we can go to the next one. So this is another creation. It was just a way of showing what we do is we create a surface. And at this point, this surface can become either something that relates to the sculptural world or something that is more linked to the architecture. But for instance, this project called Elise is a little in between, because you can see it as a standalone piece or as a partition wall. In the next slide, this is a piece we present on the booth in its regular shape. And we begin to see that it's more volumic, and it indicates some kind of a function. It can be also strictly decorative, like this module that are just spread on the wall in a more organic manner. Or it can become, next one, very sculptural when we work in large spaces, because we sometimes work in hotels or in large headquarters. On the next slide, you will see back again Reversil. Again, one way to use this surface, which is standalone pieces in different formats. And then the next slide, it totally merges into the architecture, because it's inserted in a window. So that's the way we try to direct the work. I think the final image is, yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, it's a curvature of the wires that adapts to a circular space. And now I'm already finished.
Mathieu, it's interesting to see the relation between, the mother company is, you fall under Chanel, and we know that the embroidery of Chanel is quite, it's really handmade. There's a lot of drawings and things involved. But how much is technology involved in the making of what you do, like the virtual design, you may say, or something digital?
Yeah.
Does it change or help the way you design your pieces?
Yeah. So indeed, we joined the Chanel group in 2011, and answering your question, it's a dialogue between the embroiderers that work with their hands, and that's the best tool we have to do what we have to do, and the rest of the team who's working on computers. So there's a dialogue between a virtual world on the screen and the reality. And what is interesting is that reality always comes back. At some point, we can create in this virtual world the most intricate surface with hundreds of tubes and everything is perfectly placed and it holds together. And when we begin to sample it, it collapses.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the table, as we said, we have to review our intentions based on the physical laws of our reality that applies directly to that.
Yeah, I can imagine a lot of weight because you see these pieces are huge, so maybe there's some engineering involved a lot.
Also, yeah.
In the making
Yes,
of the work.
Indeed.
It would be interesting to see what Vikram will come up with and what kind of challenges that he will pose. I know he's going to do that. So Vikram, now it's your turn. I apologize for that, but now you can feel free to speak to us about your work.
Thank you. So even that's not even my slide as well. Yeah, I only have 3 slides, Matthew. You have so many.
I don't.
But going back on what Matthew's presentation, I think I want to reflect on the idea of units and systems and present a few works that I've made over the last few years in Dubai. So this project is called Degenerative Disarrangement, and the large image to your left, is an aerial view of a courtyard. It's a top angle image, and what you see out there are interlocked bricks which have this scattered pattern. The work is called Degenerative Disarrangement, and it was shown at the Sikka Art Fair in Al Fahidi Bastakia, which is a historic neighborhood in Dubai. So there's a history to this work about a process I found on the streets. So if you see the smaller images, you see these parallel yellow lines, which is a no parking sign. That's a no parking, area designated by the municipality, and what happens is they would paint these yellow lines over those bricks. Now, what often happens is there are repair works in the city, and when they remove the bricks, they have to put them back very, very fast so that the road can be used again, and for various reasons, you want to fix the road so it's available to people again. And in that process, the bricks get disarranged. And so often I would find these scrambled bricks on streets, and I'll be fascinated by why are these patterns happening? Why is someone not putting them back in those proper yellow lines? And I spoke to a contractor that, and I found a very large area near my house where all the bricks were scattered. And I spoke to a contractor that this is like, somebody's playing out here. Somebody's really kind of having some fun on the streets. And he says, that's not the case. The thing is that we have to fix the bricks back within a short time span. Because A, the road has to be fixed again, and secondly, as contractors, we work within a time constraint and budget constraint. So I sat down with the contractor, and we calculated how much time they would spend on repairing a square meter, and that became the system I borrowed from the streets, from operations, which is what I call found processes. And I went to the RTA, the municipality, and I spent almost 2 months trying to negotiate with the person who's responsible for fixing streets and repair works. And somehow I convinced him to extract these bricks for me from a street in Dubai. So that image out there on the top right is where these bricks were originally. And we removed them, and then we got them to the site. So on the right corner, the bottom corner of the image that you see is the same location, but that's like a normal photograph. And I hired a mason, I hired a laborer, and I paid him just that much money, and I gave him a time constraint within which he could arrange those bricks. And when he rearranged them in this new site, all the bricks got disarranged. And in a sense, this sort of aesthetic, artwork, if you want to call it, was not produced by a gesture of creativity, but it was created by a gesture of time and financial constraints. And so yeah, I think that sort of speaks about my relationship with systems, with the idea of time, with the idea of labor. And there are two sort of materials working in my practice. One is the physical material, which sort of associates with formalism and sculpture, but there's also an immaterial element to my work, which is a negotiation I have with the city, be it from municipalities or be it from trading companies or art institutions. So I'll move on to the next project. Next slide, yeah, thank you. So this is called Boulder Plot. This was an installation I did in 2014. And what you see are these large boulders which have a hole inside. And the artwork was presented within this fence site, 25 by 35 meters, and that is also part of my creation. Now, essentially, this project deals with my research about how we make, about the natural environments which are used in the UAE to build, to extract construction material. So I started going to Fujairah, which is an emirate in the UAE, which is a mountainous area.
Not an emirate. Okay.
Fujairah is not an emirate? Okay, I just figured that out.
Fujairah. Sorry, I thought Khurfakan. Excuse me.
Fujairah, yeah, Fujairah is one of the emirates, yeah. And basically, it's a mountainous landscape. It's a beautiful mountainous landscape. And there's a quarrying and mining industry out there, which basically demolishes, it breaks down those mountains to create these, rock, which is used in mixing concrete. So essentially, like they bring down those mountains to create these towers. In fact, I befriended a blasting engineer out there, and I remember having breakfast from his apartment one day, and he lived on the 10th floor for almost 10 years, and he says, Vikram, do you see the mountain out there? He says, yes, I can see it. He says, when I came here, that mountain wasn't there, because there was a mountain before that. So they blasted the mountain down to feed the construction market. And so he took me to these blasting sessions, and that's where I started understanding the process of what happens. So essentially what they do is, they drill these big holes in the mountains, and they fill them with explosives, and then they blast them off. Now, very rarely, there is, some sort of an odd spot in the blasting process. So you find this odd boulder which comes out of the blast, which still retains the drill hole. And it's a perfectly engineered, drill hole that runs through the rock, and you have this very sort of organic shape, anthropomorphic shape happening out there. And for me, this sort of tension between like man's, violation of the environment and this sort of natural shape became the work. It spoke about, our relationship with the natural environment over here. So what I did was I spent 3-4 months going through all these different quarries in Fujairah and finding these odd boulders which had holes in them. So I didn't create them. That was like a mark left by the process. And basically these boulders were, brought to Dubai, where I exhibited them at this site, and I created this construction fencing. And this construction fencing is the size of the plot of the building I live in Dubai. So it's also my relationship about how I would inhabit this material in some form. And this work was exhibited for quite a few months, but part of my work was that at the end of the work, I sent the boulders back to the quarries where they might have been crushed or sold into the market again. So I'm interested also in working with economic cycles and commerce cycles. So these boulders for a while were artworks, but then they went back into the system. And so these are kind of sort of the strategies I use in making work, but also engaging different unexpected industries to collaborate with me. So next slide, please. So this is a recent project called Portrait Sessions, and unlike my previous projects, this is an attempt to kind of come back into the gallery. And this was produced for Tashkil, which is an art institution in Dubai. And basically, the project revolves around I'm inviting people to come and paint my portrait. Now, what's essential is that every person I invite, A, is not a professional painter, B, is an earning member in the UAE, like he or she earns money out here, and C, I forgot C.
The amount of money?
We're going to wait till I forget.
Specific time.
Yes, I'll come to that. So essentially, the C is every person I invite, I know them personally. And I invite them in the studio, I pose for them, and they paint my portrait. Now, here's the clincher about this project. Every person I invite, I pay him or her 150 dirhams to paint my portrait. And when I give them that 150 dirhams, I give them a formula to calculate how much time they can give me for 150 dirhams in relationship to the salary or business earnings they have. So for example, if X person earns so many dirhams a month and he works 200 hours a month, if I give him 150 dirhams, how much time he or she will give me? So now it depends upon how much the person is earning. If the person is a really sort of hotshot investment banker, he will just give me a few minutes, and that's the duration of his painting. He can't paint me more than that time. But if the person is a wage worker, then he might give me the entire day. So each painting is durational, and basically, this work was exhibited within, an institution. And what's over here is coming back to the idea of units, in a very different way. The unit is 150 dirhams, and often in my practice as an artist over here, I've engaged workers to make my work. and I have paid them 150 dirhams for a day's worth of labor, which is around 9 hours. Now, I would like to specify this doesn't specify, this amount doesn't, articulate what's the minimum wage out here. That varies. But in my experience, I've given people 150 and they've given me 9 hours in exchange. And I took this idea across society where somebody gave me a few minutes and somebody gave me an entire day. And there are some contracts I've signed with these people where I won't reveal their names, I won't reveal the duration of the painting. These have been abstracted in some sense. Although this is a very pictorial work, there's also a lot of abstraction that is present in it. And if the work is sold, I'll even share my profits with the painters, but based upon how much time they gave me. So somebody who kind of gave me just half an hour goes back with a lesser share. But somebody who gave me like an entire day gets a bigger share, and it still keeps the tension alive because you cannot judge the value of a painting by how much time you put into it. And I want to keep this tension alive. So these are some of my few works.
And this is also like interesting that you mentioned because the first time we went to MTX, you were immediately asking about the embroiderers, and you wanted to meet them, and you wanted to know how many hours they work, and you wanted to understand the system of which they work. I think it would be interesting to see perhaps between you and Matthieu, what were the first challenges that you thought were for yourself at the beginning, working with a company like or a factory like MTX? What were the similarities and what were the differences that you found, and how you thought that your collaboration would be interesting?
So I think the first thing is I do not speak French, so I often use Google Translate now to communicate with the team at MTS. Of course, Matthieu and Annie are fluent in English. But I would say more than challenge, I was looking for, of trying to understand. So Matthieu gave this beautiful presentation, and for me there's so much more going behind that work. There's so many different layers. There's an idea of history. So can we jump to the next slide? Would that be possible? Yeah. So over here, you have these are the IDs of three craftsmen who work at MTX, who have been trying to engage with, when I've recently visited Paris. And in fact, there are a few photographs of them. And that's actually a Google Translate, screen grab showing you how I've been engaging with them. And I've been having some interesting conversations, which possibly answers your question indirectly. But for me, one of the things is about each of Christelle, Satoshi, and Gabrielle, they all have studied at schools of embroidery. They understand the history of embroidery in Paris, which has a very, very, it's the investment in these crafts go back for years. And I've been trying to kind of think about questions and areas of possible, areas that can kind of open up ideas for proposals about where can we go with this. So one of the ideas we thought about was that, what's your relationship with the history of embroidery? And questions about does your body hurt when it works? Questions about what's your relationship with geometry? Is it spiritual or mathematical? So there was a lovely answer. I think that Gabrielle said my relationship with geometry is purely mathematical. Satoshi was it is spiritual and mathematical. But then Christelle said that we often start with the process of exploration, but with time it turns mathematical. And this transition from spiritual to mathematical was a thought which sort of emerged from these conversations. So I would say more than challenges, I've been trying to engage with the team at MTX who eventually physically make the work and find answers with them.
It's interesting to see for myself, working with the 4 artists, how each artist works in a different way. For example, Taline, who's here with us today, she's really concerned with the material, and she would go and test things, and then throughout the material she would come up with ways to think about the concept. Vikram was one of the artists who was really going into understanding what MTX is, and I think that this is very interesting because this is one of the aims for us to have this sort of collaboration, at a sense that it's not only a material exchange or an exchange of names, but it's also an exchange of culture and linguistic exchange, and that you can see even in the installation, in the artwork or the work that Vikram pinned up in the booth of Ko-lab. You could see and spend some time to read these conversations that he would speak about in relation to getting to know these embroiderers and getting to work with them. Matthieu, Vikram's your first artist to collaborate with. Maybe you can comment on.
Yes, absolutely. That's the first time we work with someone else in the creative field. And what is interesting, I think, is the contrast in this project between the fact that there's a macro system with Louvre Abu Dhabi and TCA, and those are big machines that conduct the project. And at the same time, the project is developed at a very microscopic level that is intimate. Yes. And this contrast between the intimacy of our exchange and the largeness and the size of the project itself is something that I think there's an interesting tension in that also. Yeah, yeah. And we didn't suspect that. Well, actually, coming from Vikram, we didn't suspect.
I think it opens up ways. It opens up different ways of thinking, even in terms of your making. When we discuss with Vikram, I think there are different possibilities that emerge, and even for him as an artist, I think you start thinking in a way. Maybe you can mention throughout this collaboration. Vikram was mentioning a painting of Monet that he likes. Maybe I think it's very nice to mention it here today. And we can go next. Maybe it's
next slide, please.
Yes.
Yeah, great. Oh yeah. So what's interesting is the MTX office, the MTX atelier, not office. Sorry, is next to the Saint-Lazare station. That's like a Google Map screen grab. And for me, the Saint-Lazare station holds special meaning because the Saint-Lazare was a beautiful painting made by Monet, and as a young boy, I saw this book, I saw this encyclopedia at my house in Bombay, and I think that was the first moment where wow, that's a beautiful painting, maybe I want to be an artist in my life. And so that's actually a photograph of myself taken 2 years ago at Musée d'Orsay, where I'm posing next to this painting, which I've always seen in books. And suddenly, MTX is next to Saint-Lazare. And also, this painting, from what I understand, is going to come to Abu Dhabi when the Louvre opens, and all the three artisans we saw earlier, Satoshi, Christelle, and Gabrielle, they all used the railway or the metro from different parts of Paris to assemble at Saint-Lazare to come to work over here. So this idea of assembly, which is at the core of MTX's process, is reflected in a very metaphorical way. And so I started visiting the Saint-Lazare station with Annie and Matthieu, and I've started kind of making studies of the roof and the station, and there are some sort of sketches and thoughts that are there on the booth. But essentially, I'm getting attracted to the idea of the grid which is present in the Saint-Lazare roof at this point, and maybe we want to dismantle that idea, but it's just this idea about I like the idea of short circuits, all these things kind of suddenly assembling by themselves and working with those ideas also. So this is a rough thought right now, but yeah.
Matthieu, what was your experience? I mean, inviting Vikram and hearing about this collaboration, and you and Annie were really welcoming, and I think that it could be something new, but it's also an artist who comes from a different place, and there are different kinds of cultural dialogues that could be interesting. And for us, even for the program as a whole, this is the aim. And I think the final artwork is just a product that is, a result of this kind of cultural collaboration, and even in a sense of going together and having these personal, intimate moments with each other. So I understood you went to the Gare together to see the patterns and maybe
in Saint-Lazare.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. But I think the baseline, as far as we are concerned, of the project is really expect the unexpected, because there are so many coincidences in this project from the beginning. Even if your personal background, the embroidery is there, the architecture is there also. So it was really amazing to identify this. Then also we live with Annie. I mean, we don't live in the office, but in the workshop, but we are there pretty often. And we didn't have this connection with Saint-Lazare, and you pointed that out actually. And indeed, the roof of Saint-Lazare is just a gigantic grid. And grid is the basis of our work. It works as a constraint, but also as a very fertile space to create things. So the fact that we create in our workshop little grids and we are just 200 meters from a huge grid is something that is also surprising and interesting.
I really can't wait to see what you come up with. I've been working with you for a year, and I understand that it's really like every step of this project is different in its own way. So the times when Vikram came to question, you know, how am I going to work? Are we going to Paris? Am I going to visit? And then the visiting moments, the discussions we have there, and hopefully really soon starting the production for something that you both come up with as a collaboration. And it's not only the work of MTX or the work of Vikram, but it's a real collaboration in which you will come up with an artwork that I can't wait to see, and hopefully will be exhibited within the museum that always welcomes you know, contemporary art, and especially the savoir-faire of France. And this way it echoes the idea of the Louvre Abu Dhabi also, that the Louvre is a museum that, you know, combines both the East and the West, and welcomes exactly as we can see here today, people coming from different parts of the world and coming up with something that we all celebrate in a museum that is there to celebrate new creations, and obviously referring back to historic places or historic objects, like with other artists and the way they were producing. So I will open it to anyone who has any question at the moment, and otherwise I'll welcome you to, if you haven't seen the exhibition yet, please spend some time to see it. It's in the center of the atrium, and you're welcome to take a catalog that will explain to you more about the project. Yes, please, Mariam.
Evening. My name is Mariam. I work in Louvre Abu Dhabi, actually. Thank you for the talk. I wanted to know, Vikram, what is your goal or your hopes for the visitors that come to the museum and see your work?
So what comes to the museum? I didn't...
What's your aim or goal for the visitors to get when they see your work at the museum?
Oh, okay, that's an interesting question, because I think it's important to understand, for at least for someone like myself, that I'm addressing a far more broader audience. You know, if I'm showing work within an institution, there's a crowd, there's people who are coming who are sort of quite informed about art, but the museum is open to a broader public, you know, from children to families. You know, it's a place of inspiration. It's a place that, you know, that kind of has different trajectories into history, and of course the Louvre Abu Dhabi, you know, the concept of it is completely unique about, you know, bridging gaps and having this universal dialogue, and for me, I think that's like the spirit that needs to, you know, maybe that's a spirit for me, that's a bigger spirit I want to echo in the work. So whatever I don't know where it's going, but I think already like this collaboration is echoing that sentiment, and hopefully the work that we create, you know, it nurtures that idea further and gives something richer to the audience.
Okay, thank you all for coming and for listening. I hope that we will have other kinds of events in the future that will update you on a regular basis about what's happening with this collaboration. And then hopefully with the opening of the museum, or after the opening, we still didn't decide yet, we will be exhibiting the work and we'll celebrate this collaboration together. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.